Diversity hire? Is that what you think of me, Mr. Thornton? I kept my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. The words had slipped from his thin lips during our morning meeting when he thought no one else could hear. But I heard. I always hear everything. Richard Thornton's pale face flushed as he realized I'd caught his whispered comment to Bradley, his faithful lieutenant. Anita, I didn't mean Miss Matthews, I corrected him, straightening my gray tailored suit jacket. And I believe you meant exactly what you said. The conference room fell silent. 6 white faces stared at me with varying degrees of discomfort. I'd been at Pinnacle Financial for exactly 3 weeks, hired as the new regional operations manager for their troubled Chicago branch. 3 weeks of subtle dismissals, of being talked over in meetings, of having my Harvard MBA, and 15 years of experience at top firms treated as if they were participation trophies handed out to meet some quota. Richard cleared his throat. Look, Miss Matthews, you're being oversensitive. This branch has certain ways of doing things, a certain culture. The adjustment period is always challenging for newcomers. Newcomers, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what we're calling it now? Bradley Mitchell, the VP of sales with his perfectly coiffed hair and country club membership, jumped in. What Richard means is that Pinnacle Chicago has a particular rhythm. Our clients expect a certain familiarity. I nodded slowly, taking in his expensive watch and the family photo on his desk, all blonde, all smiling on a yacht. Familiarity, I see. I gathered my papers and stood up. Well, gentlemen, I look forward to learning more about this rhythm you speak of. Meeting adjourned. As I walked back to my office, the smallest one on the executive floor, I could feel their eyes on me, evaluating, judging, dismissing. I closed the door and took a deep breath, staring at the Chicago skyline through my narrow window. Then I reached for my secure phone, not the company-issued one, and dialed a number I knew by heart. Marcus Wallace speaking, came the deep voice on the other end. It's me, I said quietly. You were right. This branch is exactly what corporate suspected. How bad? Marcus asked, his voice taking on that professional edge I'd known for years. Worse than we thought. The culture is toxic, but that's just the surface. I'm seeing irregularities in their reporting that suggest much deeper problems. Have they figured out who you really are? I laugh, a short, humorless sound. No. They're too busy assuming I'm a diversity hire to wonder why corporate would suddenly assign a black woman to run their precious boys club. Marcus was silent for a moment. Remember, Anita, you're not just there as regional operations manager. As head of corporate audit, you have full authority to do whatever is necessary. I know, I said, fingering the small gold key pendant around my neck, the one that opened the secure lockbox in my apartment, containing the full authorization documents from Pinnacle's CEO himself. But I want to understand exactly what's happening here before I make my move. Give me 6 weeks. You have 4, Marcus countered. The board is getting nervous. Fine. 4 weeks it is. I hung up and returned to my desk, pulling up the branch's financial records. What Richard Thornton and his cronies didn't know, what they were too arrogant to even consider, was that I wasn't just some diversity hire thrust upon them by corporate's inclusion initiatives. I was Anita Matthews, head of corporate audit for Pinnacle Financial's entire national operation, personally tasked by the CEO to investigate this underperforming branch with its suspicious patterns of client complaints and irregular transactions. My regional manager position was just a cover. In reality, I had the authority to shut down the entire operation and fire everyone from Richard down if necessary. That gold key around my neck wasn't just jewelry, it was the symbol of my real power, one that connected me directly to the highest levels of the company. As I combed through spreadsheets and client files, I noticed Janet, the middle-aged administrative assistant, hovering at my door. Miss Matthews, I brought you some coffee. Black, no sugar, just like you mentioned in the onboarding form. I looked up surprised. Thank you, Janet. That's very thoughtful. She placed the mug on my desk, her eyes briefly scanning the financial documents on my screen. I hope you don't mind my saying, but it gets easier. This branch, I mean. Something in her tone made me pause. How long have you been here, Janet? 17 years, she said, smoothing her practical skirt. I've seen managers come and go, mostly go lately. I studied her carefully. Unremarkable brown hair pulled back in a practical bun. Simple clothes, minimal makeup. The kind of woman who becomes invisible in a place like this, which often means she sees everything. 17 years is impressive dedication, I said carefully. You must know this place inside and out. A slight smile crossed her face. More than most would guess, Miss Matthews. She glanced over her shoulder before adding quietly, if you ever need help finding anything in our filing system, just ask. The official guides don't always show everything. With that cryptic comment, she slipped out, closing my door behind her. Interesting, I thought. Perhaps Janet might be more valuable than she appeared. I made a mental note to explore that connection later. For now, I had work to do, building my case while maintaining my cover. That evening, as I was preparing to leave, Richard appeared in my doorway, his typical swagger temporarily replaced with a conciliatory smile. Anita, Miss Matthews, a few of us are heading to Gibson's for steaks and drinks. Team bonding, you should join us. The invitation was clearly an olive branch after this morning's slip, or perhaps a way to get me drunk and talking. Either way, it was an opportunity. That sounds lovely, I said, reaching for my designer bag. Lead the way. Gibson's Steakhouse was exactly what I expected. Dark wood, expensive whiskey, and a clientele of predominantly white men in expensive suits. Richard and Bradley were in their element, ordering scotch and making inside jokes with the waitstaff who clearly knew them well. I was introduced to two more members of their inner circle, Doug Henderson from Commercial Lending and Vincent Paoletti from Wealth Management. So, Anita, Vincent said after our second round of drinks, his Italian surname doing nothing to diversify his pale complexion and prep school demeanor. Tell us about your background. Harvard Business School, right? Impressive. Thank you, I said, sipping my single glass of wine slowly. MBA with concentration in financial systems and compliance. I spent 8 years at Goldman before moving to JP Morgan, and then Pinnacle recruited me for special projects. Special projects? Bradley repeated, eyebrow raised. Is that what they're calling diversity initiatives these days? I smiled tightly. I wouldn't know. My work has always focused on operational efficiency and risk management. Richard laughed too loudly. Well, Chicago's a different animal than New York or whatever coastal elite city you're from. Our clients like things a certain way. Old school. Old school, I repeated. Like your client Thomas Reeves. I noticed his portfolio seems to have outperformed market indices by quite a margin these past 3 quarters. A flash of something, concern, anger, crossed Richard's face before his smile reasserted itself. Tom's a special case. Family money. We take extra good care of our premium clients. I'm sure you do, I murmured, making a mental note to dig deeper into the Reeves accounts. The evening progressed predictably, the men getting progressively drunker while I nursed my single wine. They became looser with their comments, more revealing in their attitudes. By the time the check came, which Richard put on the company card without a second thought, I had a much clearer picture of the inner workings of Pinnacle Chicago's leadership team. As we waited for our cars at the valet stand, Bradley swayed slightly beside me, Scotch fumes emanating from his expensive suit. You know, he said, lowering his voice, Richard feels bad about this morning. He's not used to, change. Change comes for us all eventually, I replied evenly. Bradley laughed. Not at Pinnacle Chicago. We've been doing things our way for 20 years. Corporate sends their little initiatives and mandates, and we smile and nod and carry on. You'll see. My car arrived first, a modest but elegant Audi that reflected my cover identity's salary. Good night, gentlemen, I said. This has been illuminating. As I drove home to my temporary apartment in the Gold Coast, I reflected on the evening. They had revealed so much without realizing it. Their entitlement, their disdain for corporate oversight, their certainty that they were untouchable. They had no idea who they were really dealing with, and that would be their downfall. Back in my apartment, I opened my secure laptop and composed an encrypted message to Marcos. Initial assessment confirmed suspicions. Branch leadership operating as autonomous fiefdom. Evidence of preferential treatment for select clients. Possible financial irregularities. Continuing investigation. We'll send secure file tomorrow. I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 4 weeks to build my case and bring down Richard Thornton and his boys' club. They thought I was just a token hire they could marginalize and eventually push out. Little did they know I was the auditor who would decide their fate. The next morning, I arrived early before most of the staff. To my surprise, Janet was already there, organizing files at her desk. "Good morning, Ms. Matthews," she said with a small smile. "You're an early bird too, I see." "The early bird catches the worm," I replied, pausing at her desk. "And please, call me Anita when it's just us." She nodded, glancing around to ensure we were alone. "How was Gibson's last night? They always take the new executives there. It's tradition." Something in her tone caught my attention. It was educational. "You seem to know the patterns well." Janet's eyes met mine, a flash of intelligence and perhaps resignation in them. "When you've been the invisible woman for 17 years, you notice patterns." She hesitated, then added, "I noticed you reviewing the Reeves portfolio yesterday." I kept my expression neutral, just familiarizing myself with our major clients. "Of course," she said, turning back to her files. Then, almost casually, "If you're interested in our special client relationships, the quarterly review files might be helpful. They're in the restricted archive, but as regional manager, you should have access." "Thank you, Janet. I'll look into that." As I walked to my office, I considered this interaction. Janet was clearly offering me something: information, assistance, or perhaps just validation of my suspicions. I needed to determine if she was trustworthy, or if this was some kind of trap set by Richard. I spent the morning in meetings with department heads, each one clearly briefed to present their areas in the best possible light. By lunchtime, I'd heard enough corporate doublespeak to last a lifetime. I declined invitations to join various executives for lunch, claiming a conference call with corporate. Instead, I made my way to the restricted archives Janet had mentioned. My security badge granted me access, as expected for my position. Inside, I quickly located the quarterly review files and began photographing key documents with my secure phone: client statements, investment summaries, transaction logs. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Certain premium clients were receiving returns that defied market logic. Funds were being moved between accounts in patterns that suggested possible fee manipulation or even money laundering. And Richard Thornton's name appeared as the primary advisor on every suspicious account. I was so absorbed in my discovery that I almost didn't hear the door open. I quickly slipped my phone into my pocket and pretended to be reviewing a file as Bradley walked in. "Anita, what a surprise finding you here in the archives," he said, his voice pleasant, but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "Just doing my due diligence," I replied calmly, "getting to know our client base and our operations." Restricted archives seemed like an unusual place to start. He moved closer, glancing at the files I'd been reviewing. "The Reeves portfolio again? You seem quite fixated on that particular client." I closed the file deliberately. "As regional manager, I believe I should understand our most significant relationships. Mr. Reeves represents a substantial portion of our managed assets." Bradley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Richard handles the Reeves family personally. Been that way for 15 years. I'm sure he'd be happy to brief you himself." "I'm sure he would," I said, standing and straightening my suit. "But I prefer to form my own assessments first. It's how I work. We all have our methods," Bradley conceded, though his body language remained tense. "Just remember that in Chicago, relationships matter. Stepping on toes can lead to difficulties." "Thank you for the advice," I said, walking past him toward the door. "I'll keep that in mind." As I left, I could feel Bradley's eyes on my back. My cover wasn't blown yet, but I'd raised suspicions. I needed to be more careful, and I needed to accelerate my timeline. Back in my office, I found a meeting invitation from Richard for later that afternoon. The subject line read simply, "Performance expectations." So it had begun. The pushback, the attempt to put me in my place. I spent the next hour encoding and transmitting the evidence I'd gathered to Marcus at corporate, using the secure communication protocols we'd established. Then I prepared for my meeting with Richard, gathering documentation of my own. At precisely 3 o'clock, I knocked on Richard's door. "Come in, Anita," he called, using my first name deliberately. He was seated behind his massive desk, Bradley standing beside him like a loyal lieutenant. "Close the door, please." I did so, then took a seat without being invited to do so. "You wanted to see me." Richard leaned forward, fingers steepled. "I'm concerned about your integration into the team. There seems to be some friction." "Friction," I repeated, an interesting choice of words. "Several team members have expressed concern about your approach, questioning established client relationships, accessing restricted files without consultation, declining team lunches." He spread his hands. It creates the impression that you're not a team player. I met his gaze steadily. I was hired to improve operations at this branch, Mr. Thornton. The Chicago branch has underperformed for 3 consecutive quarters. My methods may differ from yours, but my goal is aligned with corporate's mandate. Bradley interjected. The concern is that you don't understand the Chicago market or our client base. These relationships are delicate, especially the Reeves relationship, I asked innocently. Richard's jaw tightened. Thomas Reeves and his family have been clients for generations. They require a certain approach, certain accommodations that yield returns consistently above market performance. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Richard's face hardened, all pretense of collegiality vanishing. I don't appreciate what you're implying. The Reeves portfolio is managed according to all regulatory guidelines. Of course, I said smoothly. I'm merely trying to understand the special sauce, as it were. For the benefit of our other clients, Richard stood up, his height meant to intimidate. Let me be perfectly clear, Ms. Matthews. You were sent here by corporate as part of their diversity initiative. We accepted that directive. But this is my branch. I've run it successfully for 15 years. If you want to survive here, you'll adapt to our methods, not the other way around. I remained seated, looking up at him calmly. Is that all, Mr. Thornton? He seemed taken aback by my lack of reaction, for now. But consider this a formal warning. Your probationary period allows for termination if you're not a good fit for our culture. I stood then, smoothing my skirt. Duly noted. Will that be all? Richard dismissed me with a curt nod, and I left his office with my head high, feeling the daggers of his stare on my back. Instead of returning to my office, I made a detour to Janet's desk. Janet, would you happen to have access to the client communication logs? I'd like to review our interaction history with several key accounts. She looked up, understanding immediately. Of course, Ms. Matthews. I can pull those for you. It might take some time. They're stored in our older system. That's fine. And while you're at it, could you also find me the compliance audit records from the past 3 years? I believe they should be filed with corporate's annual reviews. Janet's eyes widened slightly. Those would normally require special authorization, but as regional manager, you should have access. I'll see what I can do. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate your help. As I walked away, I heard Bradley's voice behind me. Janet, Richard needs to see you. Now. I didn't turn around, but I could imagine the scene. Bradley reporting my requests. Richard questioning Janet about what I'd asked for. They were closing ranks, trying to control the flow of information. But they didn't realize I already had what I needed, or that Janet might not be as loyal to them as they assumed. Back in my office, I locked the door and made another call to Marcus. They're getting nervous, I reported. Thornton just gave me the "This is my branch" speech, complete with thinly veiled threats about my probationary status. Good, Marcus replied. That means you're getting close to something. What have you found? The Reeves accounts are definitely irregular. Returns that defy logic, unusual movement patterns, and from what I can gather, at least 8 other major clients have similar patterns. I've sent you the preliminary evidence. I've received it. Our forensic team is analyzing it now. Marcus paused. You need to be careful, Anita. If they're doing what we suspect, there's a lot at stake. These aren't just rule benders. They could be seriously breaking federal banking regulations. I know. And I think I might have an unexpected ally. The executive assistant, Janet. She seems to know more than she lets on. Can you trust her? Not yet, but I'm going to find out. After hanging up, I reflected on my next move. Richard and his team would be watching me closely now, possibly limiting my access to information. I needed to change tactics, find another way in. The answer came in the form of a company-wide email announcing the annual Client Appreciation Gala, scheduled for the following week at the Four Seasons. All senior management was expected to attend. It would be the perfect opportunity to observe Richard and his inner circle interacting with their special clients, including Thomas Reeves. When Janet finally returned to my office late that afternoon, she looked troubled. I'm sorry, Ms. Matthews. I've been informed that client communication logs require special authorization from Mr. Thornton. He's concerned about client privacy. I nodded, having expected this. I understand, Janet. Thank you for trying. She hesitated, then placed a folder on my desk. I was able to locate the compliance audit records, however. These are the official versions that were submitted to corporate. I caught her emphasis on official immediately. Thank you. This is helpful. Janet lowered her voice. Miss Matthews, Anita, I should mention that I maintain personal backup copies of all important documents for record-keeping purposes. Sometimes the digital systems can be unreliable. Our eyes met in perfect understanding. That's very thorough of you, Janet. I appreciate professionals who take their responsibilities seriously. She gave a small nod. If you ever need to discuss record-keeping best practices, I'm usually in the office by 6:30. Before anyone else arrives, I'll keep that in mind. After she left, I examined the compliance records she'd brought. As I suspected, they were pristine. Too pristine. Every box checked, every requirement met. Not a single flag or concern noted in 3 years. In an operation this size, that was statistically impossible. Janet was clearly offering me access to the real records, the ones that hadn't been sanitized for corporate. But why? What was her stake in this? The next morning, I arrived at the office at 6:15. Janet was already at her desk, a cup of tea steaming beside her keyboard. Good morning, I said quietly. You mentioned record-keeping practices. She stood up without a word and led me to a small conference room off the main corridor. Once inside, she closed the door and drew the blinds. Before we continue, she said, her voice steady but quiet, I need to know something. Are you really just a diversity hire sent to check a box on corporate's inclusion report? I studied her face, weighing my options. My cover was essential, but I needed allies, and my instincts told me Janet was offering genuine help. What do you think? I countered. A small smile appeared. I think Richard Thornton is too arrogant to realize when he's in danger, and I think you're not what you seem. I made my decision. You're right. I'm not just the regional operations manager. I'm here to investigate irregularities that corporate has detected. Janet nodded, unsurprised. I've worked here for 17 years. I've seen how Richard and his boys' club operate, how they treat people they consider beneath them, women, minorities, anyone who doesn't fit their mold. And you've kept records, I guessed. I've kept everything, she confirmed, reaching into her bag to pull out a flash drive. Copies of the real transactions before they were adjusted for reporting. Email exchanges about special handling for certain clients. Voice recordings of meetings where they discussed how to structure fees to extract maximum profit while staying just this side of legal. I took the flash drive, amazed at her foresight. Why? Why risk your job this way? Janet's expression hardened. My daughter worked here 5 years ago. Fresh out of college, bright, ambitious, Richard took a special interest in her career. When she rejected his advances, suddenly her work wasn't up to standard. She was let go during restructuring. No one believed her when she tried to report him. He had too many friends in high places. She took a deep breath. I stayed because I knew someday someone would come looking, someone who could actually do something. I felt a surge of determination. I am that someone, Janet. I have the authority to shut this whole operation down if necessary. She smiled then, a genuine smile of relief. I thought so. You carry yourself differently than the other diversity hires they've brought in and pushed out. There's a purpose to everything you do. And now, with your help, I can complete my mission much faster. I pocketed the flash drive. But we need to be careful. If they suspect you're helping me, I know how to fly under their radar, Janet assured me. I've been doing it for years. They see what they expect to see. A middle-aged woman who brings coffee and schedules meetings. I'm invisible to them. Their blindness is our advantage, I agreed. Now tell me about the client gala next week. Who will be there? What should I know? Janet's information proved invaluable. The gala wasn't just a client appreciation event. It was where Richard and his inner circle conducted their real business, making connections and deals that never appeared in the official records. Thomas Reeves would be attending, along with several other premium clients whose portfolios showed similar irregularities. Armed with this knowledge and Janet's evidence, I spent the next few days building my case methodically. The flash drive contained exactly what I needed: proof of systematic violations of banking regulations, evidence of fee manipulation, and documentation of discriminatory practices in client services and hiring. I encrypted everything and sent it to Marcus, who confirmed that corporate was ready to move when I gave the word. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted Richard and his team to reveal themselves, to remove all doubt about their culpability. The night of the gala arrived. I chose my outfit carefully. a striking black designer dress that was professional yet elegant, paired with my signature gold key pendant. As I entered the Four Seasons ballroom, I could feel eyes on me immediately. Richard and Bradley were by the bar, watching my entrance with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Matthews," Richard greeted me with a forced smile. "I wasn't sure you'd attend. These events are primarily for maintaining our established client relationships, which is exactly why I'm here," I replied smoothly. "As regional manager, I should know our key clients." Before he could respond, an older gentleman approached, Thomas Reeves himself, impeccably dressed in a custom tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Richard, my boy," he boomed, clapping Thornton on the shoulder. "Another spectacular year. Those returns are keeping my wife in diamonds and my mistress in pearls." He laughed loudly at his own joke. Richard looked uncomfortable for the first time since I'd met him. "Tom, allow me to introduce Anita Matthews, our new regional operations manager. She's joining us from corporate." Reeves turned to me, his assessment obvious as his eyes traveled from my face down to my shoes and back up again. "Corporate, eh? Well, they're finally sending us some attractive additions. Though I must say, you're not what I expected from one of their diversity initiatives." I smiled, ignoring the casual offense. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Reeves. I've been reviewing your portfolio. Your returns are quite remarkable." A flash of uncertainty crossed his face before his practiced charm reasserted itself. "Richard takes good care of me. We have an understanding, don't we, Richard?" Richard quickly steered the conversation elsewhere, but the damage was done. I circulated through the room, meeting other clients and team members, observing interactions, and making mental notes. Janet, working the event as staff, occasionally caught my eye as she moved through the crowd, sometimes tilting her head subtly toward particular conversations I should overhear. Midway through the evening, I found myself cornered by Vincent Paoletti near the terrace doors. "You know," he said, his words slightly slurred from too much scotch, "you're causing quite a stir among our leadership team. Richard is convinced you're some kind of corporate spy." I raised an eyebrow. "That seems paranoid." "I'm simply doing the job I was hired for." Vincent laughed. "The job you were hired for was to sit quietly in meetings, nod at appropriate times, and let us continue running things our way. That's how it works with these diversity placements." "Is that so?" "Look," he said, leaning closer, "I'm actually on your side here. I've advised Richard to be more accommodating. The world is changing. We need to at least appear progressive." He touched my arm. "Maybe you and I could discuss a more collaborative approach over dinner sometime. I know a discreet place in Lincoln Park." I removed his hand firmly. "I prefer to collaborate in the office, Mr. Paoletti. With full transparency." His expression hardened. "Suit yourself. But remember, Richard built this branch from nothing. The clients are loyal to him, not to corporate. If it comes down to choosing sides, you'll find yourself very alone." As he walked away, Janet appeared beside me with a glass of water. "You've got them nervous," she murmured. "Richard just took Reeves and 2 other clients into the private dining room for a special discussion. Can you get me close enough to hear?" Janet nodded. "Follow me to the service corridor. There's a staff entrance to the dining room." We slipped away from the main ballroom, Janet leading me through the hotel's back passages. She positioned me near a partially open door, where I could hear the conversation inside. Richard's voice came through clearly. "Nothing to worry about, gentlemen. This corporate oversight will pass like all the others, but we might need to adjust our approach temporarily." "I don't like adjustments," came Reeves' gravelly voice. "I'm paying for certain returns, Richard. That was our arrangement." "And you'll get them," Richard assured him. "We just need to be more careful with the documentation. Bradley has already implemented a new routing system for the transactions." Another voice I didn't recognize. "What about the new woman, Matthews? She's been asking questions." "A temporary inconvenience," Richard dismissed. "Once her probationary period ends, we'll find a reason to let her go. Corporate will send someone else, and the cycle will continue. They make their diversity gestures, we continue our business. And if she discovers something before then," Reeves pressed. Richard laughed. "What's she going to do? Go to corporate? Trust me, gentlemen, I have friends in high places. This branch operates under special protection." I'd heard enough. Janet and I retreated to the service corridor. "Special protection?" Janet whispered. "What does that mean?" It means Richard believes he has allies on the board, I explained. He doesn't realize that the CEO himself authorized my investigation. Bypassing the normal channels, we returned to the gala separately. For the remainder of the evening, I played my role, the outsider trying to fit in, the diversity hire learning her place. But inside, I was calculating my final move. The next morning, I arrived at the office early again to meet with Janet. It's time, I told her. I have everything I need. Corporate will move today. Janet looked both relieved and anxious. What should I do? Continue as normal. When things happen, act surprised like everyone else. Your role in this needs to remain confidential to protect you. She nodded, then hesitated. After this is over, what happens to the branch? To the employees who weren't involved? It was a fair question. The branch will likely be restructured, not closed entirely. Most of the regular employees will keep their jobs. Corporate doesn't want to punish everyone for the actions of a few. This seemed to satisfy her. We parted ways, and I went to my office to make the final call to Marcus. We're ready, I told him. Send the team this afternoon. I want to be present when it happens. They're already en route, Marcus confirmed. ETA 2 o'clock. The CEO has reviewed all the evidence and authorized full measures. I spent the morning in meetings, watching Richard and his team operate with their usual arrogance, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. At lunch, Richard even stopped by my office with a patronizing smile. Anita, I wanted to acknowledge that you handled yourself well at the gala last night. The clients were impressed with your professionalism. Perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. I smiled back. Perhaps we did, Richard. I appreciate you saying that. He nodded, satisfied that he'd successfully managed me. We have a branch strategy meeting at 2. I expect you'll have some insights to share about operational efficiencies. Oh, I definitely will, I assured him. In fact, I think today's meeting will be quite revealing. At 1:55, I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room. Richard, Bradley, Vincent, and Doug were already there, along with several department heads. Janet was setting up coffee and water at the side table, invisible as always to the men who ran the branch. At precisely 2 o'clock, the conference room door opened. Marcus Wallace entered, followed by 4 serious-looking individuals in business attire, the corporate audit team. Behind them came 2 uniformed security officers. Richard stood up, confusion evident on his face. Excuse me, this is a private meeting. Who are you? Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Wallace, Chief Risk Officer for Pinnacle Financial. These are members of our Special Audit Division and Corporate Security. Special audit? There must be some mistake. We haven't been notified of any audit. Richard looked to me for support, but found none. I stood up. My moment finally arrived. There's no mistake, Richard. Pinnacle Corporate has been investigating this branch for 6 months, following patterns of irregular transactions and client complaints. The blood drained from Richard's face as understanding dawned. You're not just from operations? I removed my ID badge and replaced it with another from my pocket, one that identified me as Anita Matthews, head of corporate audit. Then I touched the gold key pendant around my neck. No, Richard, I'm not the diversity hire you thought I was. I was sent here specifically to investigate you and your leadership team after our systems flagged multiple compliance violations. The CEO personally authorized this operation. Bradley jumped to his feet. This is outrageous. You've been spying on us under false pretenses. We prefer the term undercover audit, Marcus said dryly, and it was necessary given the sophisticated nature of the violations and the apparent ability of this branch to conceal them from regular audits. Richard was still staring at me, his world crumbling around him. You can't prove anything. Our compliance records are perfect. I smiled then, feeling the weight of 3 weeks of dismissals and microaggressions lifting from my shoulders. Your official records may be perfect, Richard, but I have the real records, the ones showing how you've been manipulating client accounts, charging hidden fees, and guaranteeing returns through questionable methods. I have recordings of you discussing these practices with clients, including Thomas Reeves. The security officers moved to the doors, preventing anyone from leaving. By authority of the Pinnacle Financial CEO and Board of Directors, Marcus announced. This branch is now under direct corporate control. Richard Thornton, Bradley Mitchell, Vincent Paoletti, and Douglas Henderson are hereby suspended pending investigation. You will surrender your credentials and leave the premises immediately. This branch will be temporarily closed for a comprehensive audit." The room erupted in chaos. Exclamations of shock, demands for explanations, threats of lawsuits. Through it all, I remained standing calmly, watching as Richard's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You won't get away with this," he hissed at me as security approached to escort him out. "I have friends on the board. This isn't over." "Actually, Richard, it is over," I replied evenly. "Your friends on the board were the first ones to approve this investigation when the irregularities couldn't be ignored any longer. No one is protecting you now." As security led the four men away, I noticed Janet watching from her position by the coffee service, a small smile of satisfaction on her face. Our eyes met briefly in mutual understanding before she resumed her perfect administrative assistant demeanor. Marcus addressed the remaining staff. "All other employees should return to their desks. You'll be interviewed individually by the audit team over the coming days. The branch will reopen under interim management once we've completed our initial assessment." As the room cleared, Marcus turned to me. "Well done, Anita. This is exactly what we suspected, but could never prove through conventional means." "It wasn't just me," I said. "I had help from someone who'd been waiting a long time for justice." Marcus nodded, understanding. The invisible ones often see the most. "Now, shall we begin the formal audit?" Over the next 2 weeks, the full extent of Richard's operation was revealed. The audit team discovered evidence of fee manipulation, misleading investment advice, discriminatory lending practices, and special arrangements with wealthy clients that violated banking regulations. Several clients, including Thomas Reeves, were implicated in knowing participation in these schemes. Criminal charges were filed against Richard and his inner circle. The branch was restructured under new leadership, legitimate leadership that reflected the diversity of Chicago itself. And Janet received not only recognition for her years of meticulous record-keeping, but also a substantial promotion to Operations Compliance Manager with a salary that finally reflected her true value to the organization. As for me, I returned to corporate headquarters with a new perspective on the importance of my work. 6 months later, I was appointed Executive Vice President of Ethics and Compliance for the entire Pinnacle Financial Organization, with a mandate to ensure that what happened in Chicago couldn't happen anywhere else. My gold key pendant remains around my neck as a reminder, not of my authority, but of how easy it is for people to underestimate someone they've decided doesn't belong. Richard Thornton saw me as just a diversity hire, a box checked on some corporate initiative. His blindness became my greatest weapon. Sometimes, being underestimated is the most powerful advantage of all.